Evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Executive Committee on the 2nd of June. I'd like to start off by taking any apologies, and we've got Councillor Duncan Wood, and I do not believe there's anybody else. Before I go on to the next item, I would just like us to spare a thought for one moment for Councillor Wood and also Councillor Yvonne Atkinson, both of whom over the last week have lost their fathers. And so I would just like to give our sympathy, and our thoughts are with them at this difficult time. Thank you. I would like now also to move to item 2, which is the
Chair,
minute.
if I may,
Yes.
can I just do the attendance roll call, please?
Okay, let's do the roll call then.
Thank you. Could members state if you're present, please, when I call your names? Councillor Bialik.
Present.
Councillor Stutton.
Present.
Councillor Fole.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Gassane.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Morse.
Present.
Councillor Pearson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Present.
And Councillor Wright.
Present.
Thank you. And for officers, can I, when I read out your names, could you just let me confirm that you're present, please? So Chief Executive and Growth Director, Kareem Hassan.
Present.
Thank you. Director David Bartram.
Present.
Director John Paul Hedge.
Present.
Thank you. Chief Finance Officer David Hodgson.
Present.
Corporate Manager Democratic and Civic Support John Street.
Present.
Thank you. City Surveyor Mike Carson.
Present.
Thank you. Museums Manager and Cultural Lead Camilla Hampshire.
Present.
Thank you. And we also have Democratic Services Officers Mark Devon and Howard Bassett in attendance as well. I can confirm we are quorum to proceed with the meeting, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Declarations of interest. Anybody has any? Can they please advise me prior to that item is being discussed? You've all received the protocol at these meetings, so I will not be reading that one out. There is no part 2 to exclude anybody, so there is no need for me to read that section out. Have we got everybody in now, please, Mark?
Yes, everyone looks like they're here now, Chair.
Okay. Okay, we dealt with item 4. And before I go on to item 5, because we do have a member of the public is asking a question, I think it's important that I make a brief statement. I think it's very important as a City Council we do this. I believe it's important that everyone takes time to pause and reflect on the horrific death of George Floyd and the ongoing global situation. On behalf of the City of Exeter, I would like to offer our thoughts to everyone affected by these awful events. Exeter is proud to be safe, welcoming, and with many vibrant and diverse communities. We do not want any form of discrimination, hate speech, or racially motivated activity, and that is why we stand united with the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a time we should be coming together, and I would encourage anyone, regardless of their race, who feels upset by what they have seen, to use the many avenues open to them, such as to sign petitions, support charities in their communities, and to embrace other communities. Silence, in my view, is compliance, and we must all stand together to be part of the solution and ensure that there is justice for all. And I like to think everybody would support us in making that statement from the City Council this evening. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 5. Mark, can we have a question
before
from
you
Keith
do-
Lewis?
Chair, before you do, you need to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Yes, sorry, John. So we got the
Please.
minutes of the last meeting. Are we agreed that I sign them as a true record?
Councillor Williams, there's just one very minor amend, Chair, and that's under present we have councillors Ledbetter, Mitchell and Moore, but they are in attendance and their names already appear lower down. So they just need to be deleted from that line, just for sake of accuracy.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We'll make sure that correction is done. Is everybody agreed that I sign them as a true record?
Aye.
Right. John, do
Yes.
I need to do a roll call for that? I'm moving it from the chair.
That's fine. If
Thank
there's
you.
a general, looks like the general consensus, that's fine.
Correctly. Lord Citrine says I can move things from the chair without a seconder. Thank you. We now have a question under item 5, and I believe it is from Keith Lewis. Mark, you are going to read the question out.
Thank you, Chair. The question submitted says the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan is very welcome, but it contains some aims that will be either impossible to achieve or undesirable. Some examples include 7.4, 8.8, which should be the case now. 9.4 is impossible within 2 years. 12.8, Section 106s are not a general taxation. Will the Executive agree with the review that the aims to ensure that it does not adopt a plan that is unlikely to be achievable? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In response to this question, we set ourselves a challenge and a question on how do we get to a net zero Exeter by 2030. Many places have set an ambitious goal, but few have mapped out what it will take to achieve that goal. A report by We Are Liminal, published this month, featured Exeter as one of the only a handful of towns and cities to map out this journey. The Net Zero Plan is produced by Exeter City Futures and contains dozens of actions that need to be pursued if the city wishes to realise the goal in the time frame declared. Some of the issues raised are relatively minor issues in terms of their contributions to carbon. The scale of the challenge in delivering a net zero Exeter in a decade is massive. But we have seen what government policy can do, that they deem to be impossible, but it can be achieved if they change direction, such as seatbelts back along, dog filing, smoking in pubs, and all show to the power of policy-led change. Seeking to find a solution through the planning and obligation mechanism for contributions to carbon offsetting have some merit, even if today this may not be the obvious route. For example, community infrastructure levy contributions towards the same purpose may be a route in the short term. Likewise, whilst there are many practical considerations that challenge us in the ensuing ensuring rainwater, for example, is recycled on all our properties, the goal is still meaningful. And yes, I agree with you that today nobody should think litter is a problem, but it is. And when it comes to ultra low emission vehicles, at some point we do have to confront the reality of the challenge facing us, and we will have to make choices. The Greater Exeter Strategic Plan is confronting the reality of 2,600 homes a year having to be built in the Greater Exeter sub-region over the next 20 years. Our highway network can't cope, and our residents should not have to put up with their air pollution consequences of continuing with the current approach. Sometimes have to give all the plan is doing is to achieve the goal. We may have to pursue a policy, but of all vehicles being ultra emissions, it seems unrealistic goal in the next 10 years. But surely that is the purpose of the blueprint. It tells us what change has to be and what issues should be prioritised if we wish to realise the goal. And I would remind everybody that the Zero Plan was as a result of us consulting widely within the community. I believe it is the city's plan, and it is owned by everybody now within our city. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair.
So I now like to move on to item 6, which is the collections development policy. And Councillor Sutton will move the item, and then I will ask Camilla Hampshire to speak to the item. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report is the new collections development policy for the Royal Albert Memorial Museum for 2020 to 2025. And the recommendation is that the new policy is formally adopted by Exeter City Council.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Camilla Hampshire, if you would like to talk to the paper, please.
Thank you, Leader. This new policy replaces the previous one that ran to 2019. The collections development policy is the foundation document for all accredited museums. So it's the sort of baseline document for every recognised museum. In the new policy, although it follows the same strategic direction of the former document, there are some changes, and we have highlighted these areas in the report, in the cover report. So this is some very particular changes around new areas of collecting that we might want to explore and for us to develop the collections. We've also noted in the report that as a result of the pandemic, there are some things that we would normally do in our policy development around consulting with neighbouring museums or collections that share similar collecting interests that we've not been able to do. We do plan to undertake that consultation, but it will happen after this report has been considered by the committee. If there are substantial changes that result from that consultation, we will bring it back to committee for further endorsement. There's also a section in the report, which is an appendix, Appendix C, which is about repatriation and restitution. We've outlined our process there, but we do expect to refine that process in the light of new guidance that is currently being formulated by the Arts Council England. And again, if that requires substantial change to the appendix, we will come back to committee. I don't think there's anything more I want to add at this stage, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. I think this might on the surface look like one of those sort of routine reports that come before committees, but having read it and having followed it through from its later draft stages, it genuinely is a really fascinating insight into how a museum actually works. You know, right the way down to you know, the kind of label that you get on a box and the kind of boxes that the things are actually stored in, all of which are really important, because if they're not stored properly, they're not going to survive. And I think the thing that comes through most clearly to me is the way that the museum has changed and developed in its over 150 years. And this really sets out how it is going to continue to do that. And as Camilla Hampshire has already indicated, it talks about new areas that you know, Prince Albert probably hadn't considered that now form part of our collections policy. So I would urge you to have a slightly more detailed look if you haven't already. It is interesting. As Camilla has said, it also deals with some of the more potentially difficult areas around repatriation. Again, I'm pleased to see that's given consideration in this report. And also, I think touches on other potential difficult subjects like the ability to actually decline offers of materials for the museum. Frankly, there's a lot of people out there whose fascinating personal collection of something they're quite convinced ought to be in a museum of some sort, and frankly, it isn't always as fascinating for everybody as the particular collector. And if Camilla had to say yes to everything that was offered, you know, the the museum would be about 5 times the size, and the storage area would be 10 times the size. So these are difficult things that have to be considered, and this really gives us a framework document to actually do that and to be able to show people this is our policy, check it out. If you think still think it fits, then we'll have a chat with you. So I commend it to the executive and to the council, and I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sutton. A bit disappointing. I was going to leave my Tamla Motown collection to the RAMM, but never mind. So we've got a recommendation therefore that we adopt the new policy. Mark, would you like to take the vote for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. When I read your name, please could you state if you're for, against, or abstaining on the recommendations, please? Councillor Bialik.
For.
Councillor Sutton.
For.
Councillor Fole.
For.
Councillor Gassane.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
For.
Thank you. That's a unanimous vote in favour of the recommendations, Chair, and they have been carried.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'd like to move on to item 7, which is members' allowances and expenses paid during 2019-2020. There is a recommendation there that we note the report. John Street.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, this is the annual report which has the statutory responsibility to publish of the expenses and allowances that have been paid to all councillors who have held such a position within the financial year, which is why you'll find that there are more than 39 on the list. But it clearly states what has been paid for them by basic allowance, special responsibility allowance, and any expenses, conferences, and other expenses which have been paid during the year. Quite happy to answer any questions if there are any, Leader.
Thank you, John. I'll open it up for any questions or contributions. I see nobody's indicating. Therefore, Mark, I will ask you, and it is that we note this we note the report. So I'll ask you, Mark, to do a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Fole.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Gassane.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Morse.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
For.
Thank you very much. That's a unanimous vote in favour of the recommendations, Chair, which have been carried.
Thank you. I now move on to item 8, which is Exeter's recovery plan. And we have a Councillor Diana Moore who wishes to make a statement under Standing Order 44. Councillor Moore. We need to hear you, Diana.
Can everybody hear me now?
We can.
Fantastic, thank you. The impact of COVID has been a real shock to the lives and system, and its impact will be felt for years. So the recovery plan with the council and others is a really important piece of work. So this is a resolved item that will be discussed here, but rather than at council. So I do have a number of questions that I would be grateful for clarification and more information. So the first one is, what is the purpose of the organisational change that you wish to undertake within the council? The second question is an item of clarification. So at the executive of July 2019 and the subsequent council, they approved the establishment of a board to oversee the Livable Exeter Garden City programme. The recommendation said the proposed composition of the Livable Exeter Garden City programme board and the draft terms of reference would be delegated and reported back to a future meeting of the executive. When will those terms of reference and membership of the Livable Exeter Garden City programme board be reported back to the executive? And I'm not quite clear, is the Livable Exeter Place board the same as this board, or a different board, or a subcommittee? And where will the minutes and work of these bodies be published for the public and council to see? The report rightly recognises the inequalities in the city and the areas of multiple deprivation. And there are also now more people facing very different and very challenging circumstances compared to the start of the year as a result of the lockdown. What immediate work is going to be undertaken to understand and respond to immediate community needs, helping people find jobs, cope with reduced work and income, and ensuring no one goes hungry, and also help combating the deep isolation that many feel as we move out of lockdown and some feel that we have to remain. The report also talks about development finance and the work that has been done on the City Development Fund and the One Public Estate, and I would be grateful if you could explain the outcomes of this work. Various work groups are mentioned in the report, and what role will councillors have to contribute alongside partners to the city in this work? I've almost finished. In the Principles of Recovery, it talks about working with communities to understand needs and co-deliver the plan. What role will residents and community organisations and others have in the co-production of the plan? I'd like to also know about what specific recommendations or requests has the council made to Devon County Council for measures using the new statutory guidance for highways authorities to reallocate road space to provide safe spaces on roads for pedestrians, cyclists and people with disabilities. I noted that there were some proposals for the 1st of June, but these don't seem to have been implemented. And finally, carrying on with the net zero issue, does the net zero Exeter 2030 plan drive the recovery of the city, or is it something that you see is going to be looked at after the recovery plan is finalised? Thank you.
Thank you for your statement, Councillor. What I will do, as I've done before, as you know, Standing Order 44 is quite clear that you can make a statement to the executive. Although this may be a resolved matter, you can, at the full council, ask questions on resolved matters. That's always been the case and always will continue to be the case. And you have raised a number of questions in writing. I'm not sure if you've added a few there, but those that you have raised in writing to us, I will ensure, as I did on the last occasion, within the next few days, you get a written explanation to those particular points. Some of the other points you may well raise, you may find that comes out in the discussion and the report, because the Chief Executive will talk to the report in a few moments. So if you have asked some additional questions within your statement which you hadn't previously notified and you want an answer for those, would you mind if you were to email me and John Street, and I will make sure, as I said, you get a written answer to those questions. Thank you for your statement. Now, the recommendation on the recovery plan, we have 4 recommendations. And as you can see, that we're being asked to the draft recovery plan and support the work of the council officers, who I do know are working quite hard on this matter now. The progress report will be reported back to executive, and in particular, the role of the City Council could play in the recovery programme through direct interventions in support of the Livable Exeter Housing Programme and the Council's own development company, Exeter City Living. The Executive also notes that the Livable Exeter Place Board will be requested to adopt the plan on behalf of the city as a whole. The Executive notes that officers of the City Council are leading the work on the recovery plan and will continue to provide support to progress the individual work streams. So I will ask the Chief Executive Officer, Karim Hassan, to speak to the report. Karim, and don't feel that you're time limited. This is one of the most important items we are going to be discussing as an authority over the coming weeks. So we need to take appropriate time. Karim Hassan.
Thank you. So we are still in the response stage to the major incident, which is this COVID-19 crisis. But it's clear that attention now is focusing on the recovery, helping businesses get back to work. And so it's quite natural now. Many organizations are starting to think about how we build back the economy, particularly in the context of some really scary stories are now emerging regarding the impact that's going to be had on the economy. And indeed, many are saying this will be potentially the worst recession we would have seen in our lifetimes. But it's important to understand that as part of the formal response and the recovery, there is a mechanism by which the local resilience forum sets about the recovery work. And that work is going on across the county, and Dave Bartram, our director, sits on that recovery work with the county colleagues and is planning the response to that recovery exercise. You also have got the work that's going on at the strategic level with the local enterprise partnership. The Heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership, because of the concerns of the impact on the Devon economy, are also producing a recovery plan. And that recovery plan is very much looking at how do we deliver inclusive growth, how do we deal with the sectors that are likely to be the most damaged by what has happened, and also how do we stay true to purpose in terms of our clean growth aspirations. For many Devon districts, that will be it. We took the view that that was too generic, too strategic to be sufficient for the city of Exeter. That we also needed a place-based response in terms of our recovery program that looks to do the convening of all the key stakeholders and businesses in the city to understand how we respond on the basis of place rather than generic issues. So that's what we've done. We've used the convening power of the City Council to pull together the leading institutions, stakeholders in the city to think about the exercise of planning for recovery. We understand from the last recession the kind of things that we can do without requiring government funding or others, what we can do to help ourselves to build a successful recovery. So that's what we've done. The Livable Exeter Place Board was set up to be the body that is capable of convening across the city and getting us to focus on the strategic priorities and being a point of advocacy on behalf of the city to key government agencies. So what we've done to date is to take to the Place Board the challenge. The Place Board, because each business and organization on that Place Board is seeing the current crisis in a particular distinctive way, but they've all been clear. We need to set some very clear priorities for the city and that we need to be focused. And so the Place Board has set the task of identifying what are 7 key themes that will underpin the recovery of Exeter, which will also feed into the recovery work I outlined earlier. So it's very much a Russian doll kind of approach to recovery. What we do at place level will align with what's happening at county level and what will be happening at regional level. So the 7 areas that we've identified in this report before you tonight focuses on the development construction sector, where we have considerable opportunities based on our existing infrastructure planning and development that we've been working on for a number of years to build tangible projects that might deliver fairly quickly outputs that will help the economy of the city and develop the kind of supply chain development that will be required to get out of this recession. Second area of focus is our city centre, because the city centre is so critical to the way the city works and the number of people that are employed in the city centre, and where there are particular challenges around retail and services that social distancing will be placing upon them, and they will need our support. You've got the visitor economy, and we know currently those jobs that are most at risk have been identified in those sectors to do with culture and the arts, where many of those staff have been put on furlough, and we need to have a very clear view about how we support the visitor and cultural economy to support the recovery of the city as a whole. Transport, because the city happens to have a very large transport employment base, but is also the home to Great Western Railways, our airport, Stagecoach, and critically, the ability of transport to serve the institutions of the city that depend on public transport. So the college, for example, is reliant on public transport to bring pupils from a wide catchment area, and therefore what we've been endeavouring to do is to facilitate conversations with those key stakeholders and our institutions to know what is needed to support them. Education, because of the impact of the university in our economy is so significant, we've felt that we have to be focused in terms of what we have to do to support the college and the university. Business support, and one of the questions that was raised by Councillor Moore relates to how we help people back to work, and our whole skills agenda and what we do to support businesses back to work is part of that business support agenda. And then finally, community well-being. And that will be so important as we understand the impact that that unfolds from the recession. Clearly, we're hoping that will be a sharp return, but we need to plan for might be a much more longer recession if that happens to be the case. There are some issues that we've had to think about, one of which is there is a financial reality for which we are now working within. We no longer have the capacity that we had a decade ago when we had the last recession because of what's been happening at national government and what is imposed on local government. And so there's a genuine resource issue that we have thought is best developed in partnership across the city, and that all organizations are brought together to help us. Things that we would have done in the past, investment in public realm, investment in projects, which will be more challenging given the financial context we're working within. Now, we do envisage a product of a recovery plan will be a number of asks that will be made of others. That might be made to government agencies, it might be made to the government, which will be, in other words, where we advocate on behalf of the city for investment. An example of this might be in the development world, where house building, which is so important for getting the local economy to be moving, where investment in big infrastructure items might require new innovative mechanisms to get funding in to unlock sites. It would be entirely appropriate for the city to identify a number of asks, infrastructure requirements, and funding opportunities that might be aligned at the city level. So that is something very much in focus. But what we've tried to do is look, what can we do without external funding? And at the moment, we are building, for example, on the bus and coach station side, with the investment in leisure, which is anchoring a wider development, which is already on the agenda on a subsequent item for you to consider. The recommendation contains a particular issue, which is the way we as a city council may be able to help development through our own development company. And what I was recommending, Leader, is I bring back a report to look at the opportunities that company may give us to also bring forward developments directly without relying on others. So that's contained in the recommendation. I think I'm going to leave it at there, and I'll wait in case questions come, Leader.
Thank you, Karine. I would just add that quite a direction of this can be found on pages 94 through to 97, And on that point, just as I make a couple of comments, David Bartram, just to give you at least a 2-minute warning, I'll ask you to come in and talk about some of the work you're doing in business support and city centre in a moment. But as you can see, what that says is about the livable Exeter and what we're trying to do. It talks about the firm foundations for recovery, about our strong track record, our strong strategic and collaboration that we have with a lot of other agencies in Exeter, an outstanding educational centre, a Garden City designation, the St Sibyls Point, which, if you're on your exercise or meeting up with people in accordance with the statutory regulations and you happen to bypass the site, you will see it is well and truly coming out of the ground. We've published a roadmap for carbon neutral city. We're one of the 12 Sport England local delivery parliaments. We've an established analytical city approach. We've got the emergence of the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan. We've got alignment with the heart of the Southwest Industrial Strategy. We are indeed, and we mustn't forget at this time, we are a UNESCO City of Literature designation. And of course, the emergence of Exeter Chiefs and Sandy Park as a premiership stadium and conferencing facility. And then it goes on to talk about the recovery principles. And I'm not going to talk what is already there for you to see. But the livable board is a board, as Kareem has told you. It is bringing the key players. And when we discussed this, and it was Kareem's idea, I've got to give it to him, when we discussed this last year in bringing this body about, I won't say we had grave doubts. We had doubts of whether or not a lot of people would want to come to the table. And we thought how we could get them there. And it's funny, because at the moment, we've got a queue of people now wanting to be involved with us on that board. They see the importance of that board in the recovery plan, not just to them, but as the city. And I think that is so important. It is not a council committee. It will not be making the decisions for us. The decisions rest with the executive committee and, where appropriate, the full council. I want to assure people. But if I have got the opportunity to get round a table, people like Sir Steve Smith, people like John Laramie, people like the Chamber of Commerce, Homes England, Sport England, the Chief Constable, the RD&E Hospital, okay, Exeter Chiefs, even Exeter City Football Club, and all of these major influences and community organisations which are represented on a citywide. We have Lady Studham from the Arts Council, Charlie Courtney in the House of Lords, who is talking on our behalf. You can see that they are, in my view, the people who can take our aspirations forward in accordance with our policy. As I say, they will not be making our decisions for us. We will always make those decisions. So that was important just to make that, because I wanted to rest people's mind on that this is not an unaccountable body at all. So I will now open this up to, but first of all, I've given you a bit of a time to prepare. David, would you like to tell us how you are working? Because it's not just the City Council is going to resolve all these things. It's working with everybody else. We cannot pass a motion and sort it all out. We have to work with all these people like Stagecoach, Great Western, the university. So, David, how are you getting on with it all so far?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just unmuting myself there. Yeah, so as Kareem mentioned, there are several layers to this. So I sit on the Business and Economic Recovery Task Group, which is a Devon County-led group, representative of businesses and organisations across the whole of Devon, and that is very strategically focused, as you would expect. But the more city-focused groups have now started meeting. And to be honest, my teams, my engineers and my economy and growth team started working on this long before those teams ever started meeting. So we were looking at the social distancing aspect of reopening the city centre before those groups started meeting, and it is complex in a city like Exeter, where you've got a lot of narrower streets. You know, we're a very historic city, and that has its own problems. So we've come up with several plans for that, which we've submitted to the city centre group. Now, the city centre group is one of the subgroups to the place board, chaired by John Laramie. And again, he's very representative of the business and organisations which operate in the city. So it's a really good sounding board for the principals. And we've been working on a lot of things other than just the social distancing, how we get people back into the city centre, how we build their confidence. So there's a whole raft of issues that group is looking at the moment. And we've had some really good, it's a very practical, action focused group, which is great. So directly sort of well, it is in contrast to the more strategic groups of the county, but we need both. So the other group is the business support group, and there's some elements in that which overlap with the city centre group. But again, that's met for the first time, and there's really good ideas coming out of that of how we can support local businesses and the economy to grow. So very representative groups, very active, lots of really good contributions. So they're working well so far.
Thank you, David. Before I open it up for discussion amongst the executive, as you know, the opposition group leaders are entitled to speak on the items. Just to say, for information going forward, you come in after the officer has spoken and before we go into debate, and should you wish to do so, I will ask you to do what all the others do, is to raise your hand through the system. But on this occasion, I'll ask you. So if you and Andrew can prepare yourself on further items for that. So, Kevin, is there anything you would like to contribute or statement to make?
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Chief Exec and Dave for their statements and comments, and also your comments as well, because I think that's very helpful to hear your views on this item, which obviously is a vital issue for the city as we move forward over the weeks, months, and even years ahead. So thank you for those contributions, and I very much appreciate that this will be reported back, and this is the beginning of a long process, so we'll be coming back to the executive at a later point. And I also accept that it's important that wider bodies and stakeholders are involved in the process, because the only way to change things dramatically within the city is to involve those organisations and individuals. And at that point, I ought to declare an interest as an employee of the RD&E, because that was mentioned earlier. So I will make that interest now. However, my only concern about this at the moment, and it's a minor concern, but hopefully you can reassure me, is that communities and councillors will be involved in the process at relevant points, particularly when you look at some of the items that are on here. Particularly with community well-being, for instance, it's vital that we bring our communities along with us in this process to ensure that they feel part of the recovery, as well as the larger organisations such as the university, the county council, and others that you've quite rightly pointed out. So broadly, I welcome this, but just with that caveat. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Ledbetter, are you still with us? Would you like to speak?
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Andrew.
Excellent. I want to say very much, only to say that I also like to hear about King and let the board. So thank you to everybody who's put all this work in. Nothing further to add at this moment. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Ledbetter. Before we go into the debate, just to answer that point, I've said it and I'll repeat it. It will be the executive and the council that makes decisions that the council and the executive can make. We will work with agencies such as Stagecoach, Great Western, the university, and all the others to ask them as to work with them on whatever recovery they would like to do for the city. We do and we will involve groups, as we all do, through our structures and procedures. We will not be setting up anything in particular different and separate to. I think we have a tried and tested opportunities for people to question what we're doing or to scrutinise it, and I do believe that the Scrutiny Programme Board is meeting, I believe, in 2 days' time, and they may want to scrutinise and look at it, and that is exactly within the powers of our Scrutiny Board to do that and to take evidence and to do all those things that the Scrutiny Programme Board will sort of work with the various scrutiny committees. Okay, so I hope that sort of again reassured you a little bit, Kevin. So I'm now going to open it up, and I've got an indication from, first of all, Councillor Sutton, then Councillor Morse, and then Councillor Gussain. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too welcome this report. I think it really kind of sets out clearly what we need to do, and more importantly than that, how we're actually going to achieve it. And I just really wanted to report back that the first meeting of the visitor economy group took place this afternoon, which is one that's chaired by Charlie Courtney, as he likes to be known, and it's like a lot of our city council driven initiatives, brought together a vast range of experience from all sorts of organisations. We had representatives from the university, from the cathedral, we had someone from the BID, we had someone from the LEP, we had some representatives of the small traders in Topsham, and you know, it was a great meeting. A lot of people already knew each other, not everybody did, but it really is starting to set the framework and, you know, kind of nail down what are the issues that we need to address. And Charlie Courtney in particular was taking on board the points that were made about, I think the government guidelines were described as fuzzy. You know, we not only do we tend to get them at 5 o'clock at night, but then they, you know, we get an announcement and then we have to wait a while before sometimes something comes out, and it's not always very clear. And he was very keen to take back the need for clarity and speed to enable people to make the changes they need to do. And a lot of the businesses were saying it's all fine and dandy to actually give them dates to open, say, for instance, the 4th of July, but for a number of businesses, it's going to take them 2 to 3 weeks to actually get ready to open. They don't just wander into the premises and turn the sign around from closed to open. They've got all kinds of things that they've got to address, and these things take time. And I don't think the government is always fully cognizant of the complexities of that. So it was an interesting meeting. They are going to happen regularly. John Paul was there and was making fantastic contributions, and he and I were able to answer some of the questions to the City Council. But clearly, this partnership way forward is going to work for everybody, and I'm confident. I'm not underestimating the challenges, because they are many and great. But I'm confident that we've got a structure here that will work to actually draw all this expertise together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Councillor Morse.
Thank you. I don't want to overly repeat what's already been said by other people. First of all, I'd just like to thank the officers and the team that have been heading up this work, especially the economy team, who came straight out of the closure of Flybe and the economic and employment issues that caused, where they worked tirelessly and brilliantly, came straight out of that into this. And as someone who has been consulting them with a lot of inquiries from people around the city, they have been so good at answering questions, getting the information, finding government guidance as it's released to let people know what to do. So I just wanted to thank that team, because I think they're a very small team, but they punch way above what you would expect for such a small team. I think, I don't want to be too cliched, but this is an unprecedented situation in which we do not understand what the world's going to look like. It will be better in many ways, I'm sure, but it's definitely going to be worse as well. And I think, like the carbon neutrality of Exeter, we have to understand that we can't do this on our own. It's not something the council can sit above everyone and tell them how they've got to behave and what they have to do, while we don't have the financial power nor the authority to do that to all of them. So I think that this working group, getting involved in this working process, is a brilliant idea, and I'm very happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Gussain.
Yes, first of all, I would like to welcome the swiftness by which the recovery plan has been put together. And I, as a portfolio holder for communities, really thrilled to see that is one of streams that of focus of the recovery plan is communities. I think communities will be at the heart of the recovery, and I know that from our network, community builders, and all the other organizations that is within Exeter Wellbeing have proved itself through the COVID crisis, and it proved and continue to prove how much our penetration into the community, and we always will work with all people in the communities, because that's what we did all through the COVID. And before that, we have constant feedback from all individuals, organizations, community builders, community connectors, and our Citizen Advice Bureau, and also all our voluntary sector that have been constantly feeding back on what is going on. So yes, definitely there will be, to me, I think the community will be involved in thinking of solutions for where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gussain. I've got nobody else indicated, so I'm going to ask Kareem Hassan to come back to some of those points and to wind this one up for us. Kareem.
Chair, I think it's, from my point of view, really satisfying that members are appreciative of the work that is being done in really in extraordinary times, and that you're valuing the work that's being done across the city in partnership, that recognizes the role that you play crucially. And I think it's the unique role that the City Council can play, which is the convener of place. You effectively provide the platform to bring all the city together in a way that is entirely focused on the city and the recovery that's needed to make our successful city get out of this recession quicker than others. And I am extremely confident that the people behind our city and the work we're doing will make sure that we continue to do what we've done, which is to power the Devon economy and to make the kind of decisions that show long-term strategic thinking, real clarity of where you want to go and what it takes to get the job done. And I think it's because of that, people are showing they're willing to work with us, and they're doing so in such a positive manner that has enabled everybody to feel we can face up to this challenge. So all I would like to say, Leader, is if you just give us a bit of time to come back to you with a report that probably will come back either in July or August, which will address the work that we can do directly as a City Council to help with this, and also to then produce the plan for you, because this is just the process by arriving at the plan. What we want to do is give you the content for the members to be able to then look at and give you comfort that all the issues that you raised are actually going to be addressed. That's it.
Thank you, Kareem. And of course, as many of the executive will know, as they are involved in a number of meetings daily and weekly on a number of issues, Kareem and myself sit in meetings of the Devon leaders, with the County Council. We sit with the heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership. We meet with the Southwest Councils, where this is high on the agenda on how we're working together. It's not a race against other local authorities, but we are in a good position. And with regard to the place board, I believe in discussing it with leaders throughout the country that I have been, they are quite envious and asking us, how did you do that? How did you get people together? And do you know what? If we never had this group, this body, I feel sure somebody out there would be asking me a question saying, why don't you get all these people together? Why don't you work all together on a common solution for all of us? Well, I'm pleased to say we're ahead of that game and it will come back to us. So I'm very, very pleased to be able to put forward the 4 recommendations contained in item 2 on 83 Mark. And if there's no other contributions, I'd like us to move to the vote, please, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Bialik.
4.
Councillor Sutton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Fole. Councillor Fole. I'll come back. Councillor Gassane.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
4.
Councillor Pearson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
4.
Brilliant. There's Councillor Fole. Are you there?
I am. I'm 4.
Thank you. That's a unanimous vote, Chair, in favour, and the recommendations have been carried.
Thank you, Mark. And so we move on to item 9, which is Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan. And I'm going to ask Councillor Sutton to move the recommendation. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you. The recommendations for the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan are that the Executive recommends and Council adopts the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan as Council policy to inform all policy documents, plans and corporate decision making in response to the climate emergency and in pursuance of the goal to make Exeter a carbon neutral city by 2030. 2.2, that the plan be presented to the Livable Exeter Place Board for consideration with a recommendation that the Livable Exeter Place Board be the appropriate body to adopt the plan on behalf of the City of Exeter. That the Chief Executive and Growth Director, in consultation with the leader of the Council, be authorised to explore opportunities to secure investment and to create mechanisms for funding the programmes set out in the plan. And finally, that when clarity has emerged on the financial position of the City Council, specifically whether or not the government intends to further financially support local authorities as a consequence of this COVID-19 crisis, the Chief Executive and Growth Director brings back a report to Executive on how the City Council will deliver the actions set out in the section What Exeter City Council Can Do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. And again, it's Karim Hassan, who I know has done a lot of work on this throughout. Karim, would you like to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Leader. This is probably one of the most important documents that this council will have had to deal with. About 12 months ago, the emergency that the planet was addressing was climate change. And our council, along a number of councils, declared a climate emergency. And I think we all know now what an emergency feels like. We're living through one. And the next decade is probably the most important decade for humanity. And the target that you set to achieve carbon neutral city by 2030 reflects the fact that we do need to reduce carbon emissions across the planet over the next decade by 50%. And what you did when you set that goal was an ambitious statement that if you had asked me as an officer Could we achieve it? I would have said to you, absolutely candidly, I don't see how we could. It is such a big, bold, ambitious statement. Based on what we knew at the time, I thought the timetable was extremely challenging. But you set that agenda. We didn't have clarity about how we might achieve it, but you set the task and you engaged Exeter City Futures on our behalf to produce a blueprint how the city would have to go about the task to achieve that target by 2030. And they started that task before the COVID-19 crisis. So there was a lot of work done before that crisis, and they finished it during the crisis, during the lockdown. And the world has changed. The whole energy behind this climate emergency and climate agenda has been suffocated by the COVID crisis. And the financial context has changed profoundly. But we felt it was very important that we bring this plan to you at the earliest opportunity. And the particular reason why I felt it was important that we bring it to you, in spite of the financial challenge that we have as a city council, was we were going to be building a recovery plan. And if we didn't build into that recovery plan the goal of achieving this carbon agenda, this carbon neutral city, the danger was we would be committing ourselves to development that we would live with for another generation. And that is exactly what happened at the last recession, when the development world came knocking and were asking us to water down standards and water down quality in order to get things moving. And the government stepped away, the national government stepped away from the climate commitments to water down standards in order to get people building. And I felt it was important that you have the opportunity to put the marker down, to say to us, if this is the direction you want to go forward in the next 10 years, you need to send that signal to the development industries, and you need to send a signal to the retailers, because what it's showing us is that we've been reliant on supply chains that are global, that have massive carbon footprints, and we've neglected local produce. We've neglected the ability to buy and purchase commodities from local shops and independent shops, because we've all been buying into this global system that in the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated the real vulnerabilities to our economy. And therefore, what we've done with this report is say to you, that's a plan of how you get to the 2030 goal. But clearly, the financial context has changed profoundly. And it's only right and proper that we come back to you when we have opportunity to understand what the financial context means for us as a city council. I liken it to this kind of advice on an airplane when you suddenly have a problem and oxygen running out, and they say, put the mask on you first before you help others. We've got to address our financial context before we can embark on many of the programs that are set out in this document. And at the moment, we're sitting on a financial challenge which is absolutely massive, is unprecedented, caused because the income streams to the city council are being closed off because of the lockdown. And we, like all business in the city centre, are vulnerable to that loss of income because of decisions that have been taken necessarily by government in order to maintain our health. But it has an effect, and it had an effect on us, and it's dramatic. We have a 13.5 million net budget, and we have got a shortfall that we've told government, because they've asked all local authorities to tell them what our financial position is, and we've had to tell the government that our current position is we are forecasting a loss of income of £9.2 million, and we're having to incur expenditure of 1.2 million because of COVID-19, which has given us a shortfall of some 10 million. And we've got a 13.5 million budget, and all we have is 4.5 million reserves. And we've got a massive challenge to address what will be a significant shortfall. And we don't have the luxury that the NHS has or government has, where they can carry over a negative. We have to balance our books within the 12 months. And so that's the challenge I'm facing. So this was a very difficult decision. This is the plan to get us to the goal that you set. But what I can't do is stand before you today and say to you that we've got the resources, both the capacity of staff and the financial resources to deliver on this ambition, because we're going to be having to deal with the financial consequences of this crisis. And that is going to cause us to have to question what we do. And it doesn't give us the capacity to then drive what is a transformational agenda that no city has ever done. So just to put this into context, you were quite rightly saying, Leader, that there's only a handful of cities that have produced this plan. And when you start quoting these cities like Bristol, they operate net budgets of £275 million. We've got a net budget of 13 million. Our ambition is no less than anybody, but we step and we punch well above our weight. We do these kind of things, but what we can't do is say to you in the way that classically we would have done 10 years ago, we would have said to you, that's the program, there's the targets, there's the resources, you hold us to account to how we deliver, and scrutiny would do exactly that. I'm saying to you today, we do not have the organizational resources to deliver on this program, to deliver what we need to do, but what I've asked you for is authority to find ways of how we might bring those resources in to deal with the issues that are identified in the plan. And some of the examples of that, there's 5 big ticket carbon issues that the plan is talking about. One of which is retrofit of domestic houses, council houses, private houses, where we know fossil fuel is going to be turned off. There will no longer be gas boilers going into houses. We're going to have to find ways of insulating properties and delivering the kind of energy and heat that those properties need from non-fossil fuels. And we've got to find solutions how we do that. And it has to be done mainstream, and it can't just be done pilots. And we are doing pilots now, but you're not going to solve the problem by just doing pilots. It's got to be done mainstream. And there are examples like that, and there are mobility solutions we need to solve problems. I can keep going on, and I don't want to go on about it. But the reality is, the challenge is considerable. I'm asking for authority to start exploring those opportunities. How might we go about that task and to bring it to you? And what I would commend for all of you to, members to look at is, this is a city-wide endeavor, not a city council alone endeavor. And what I'm asking is for us to take this to the place board and to invite the place board to adopt this plan on behalf of the city as a whole, so that all institutions of the city commit to the same program. And I expect all of them to want to have due diligence about the agenda and about the things that are contained in it. But the Livable Exeter Place Board amended the Exeter Vision 2040. They inserted the commitment to be zero carbon by 2030. They made that. And I say, therefore, this is the plan how you deliver it. And we need to find ways of how we secure it. And I'm going to finish there, Leader.
Thank you, Kareem. I don't think anybody should challenge your passion or your commitment to this project, and also for the well-being of the city. I think everybody supports it. Councillor Sutton, would you like to come back in at the moment?
Yes, thank you. I would. Yeah, Kareem's really kind of set the scene very well, and work has been going on this document and the journey towards it for quite some while now. And I know colleagues around a metaphorical table have been taking part in consultations, and there have been consultations before lockdown with communities around the city and other stakeholders. And we mustn't underestimate the challenge that we've set for ourselves. But also we mustn't be blown off course by people who, like our questioner this evening, really, who has been through the plan and has said, well, yeah, it's a great plan, but you know 8.2.3, you're never going to manage that, and 9.4, you ought to have already done that. And it's really kind of missing the point, isn't it? If you're actually going to drill down to the tiny subsections and then start picking holes in it. This is a climate emergency, and with or without COVID-19, it's not going to go away. So this is a bold plan. As I said previously about the recovery plan, it builds on our considerable ability to build partnerships with stakeholders, with the private sector, with our communities across the city, with the other big employers across the city. And we need all of those organisations and all of those people to think big, to actually say that they're proud to be part of and a city that has these ambitious goals, but also is prepared to think small and think about their own lives and their own families and how they operate and what they can do, the changes that they can make in their lifestyle, which they might have been thinking about anyway and might have come more sharply into focus because of the current COVID emergency. But this is where we want to be. We very clearly set out the direction of travel, as Kareem has obviously made the point that we can't just kind of find us the money to do it. We have to be as innovative and as imaginative in finding the resources to deliver this as we have been in formulating the plan in the first place. So yes, we'll be supporting the recommendations and look forward to working with officers and everybody else on how we actually get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. We now have a statement under Standing Order 44 from Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Diana Moore.
Thank you very much. I'm really very pleased to see this plan. And I completely agree with the Chief Officer that this is an ongoing emergency and how COVID has really highlighted the weaknesses, the fundamental weaknesses in our system, and how this plan needs to drive the recovery. I'd be quite interested to hear the leader's view on what action he would see as the priority for this council to implement, what would be most impactful. But one of the things I would like discussed as part of your discussion is some clarity about recommendation 2.4, which says obviously that the council needs to be clear about its own financial position and that a report would follow after that. I think we need to actually ask that a report is brought back in July when the emergency budget is looked at, and should be presented at the same time as the budget and include a range of options for finance. I'm very clear that it's not all going to be able to be decided now. There needs to be a range of options. But I'm very concerned that if we wait until we're clear about the council's finances, we could be waiting quite some time. So we need to bring that report forward soon. Thank you.
Thank you. I've not had any indications from Councillor Ledbetter or Mitchell, so I assume they don't want to say anything on this item. First of all, Diana, I never need to be asked for an opportunity to be asked what I think about something. You know full well I will always indicate what I have to think about something. I totally support this plan. And what I like about it more is the fact that we have consulted with a number of groups. That's what I like about it. It is not some politician locked away, some officer locked away with their narrow view of something. We've actually talked to people and we've brought that together. And Liz O'Driscoll and the team, before she departed from us, I think they've done a great deal of work. And many of us have attended a lot of those meetings that she had and what they've been doing for us. So I think we're ahead of the game at the moment. The Chief Executive has said, and I'll be mentioning it later on as well within the reports we've got, I quote a meeting I had with a good friend of mine, the leader of Plymouth, when he was talking about the electrification of the line to the southwest. But you know my career background. Of course, I would want to see the electrification. But when we're told just 5% of the carbon emissions is through rail, so you would make all that investment. Okay, I'm not saying we shouldn't at some stage. Don't start trolling me, people. You wouldn't make that great investment to reduce 5% to say 3 or 2.5 or 2. I'll tell you where I think the big ticket items are, is the home. It is the home that produces, next to transport overall, the home that produces the most carbon. Look what already the HRA team has been doing at the Chestnut Avenue, and that was only a 6 pilot, and I'm not going to steal Councillor Wright's thunder in a moment. Look exactly what we've achieved there by retrofitting those homes. And I know Laura Wright, Councillor Wright, is itching to tell us and to bring a paper forward to tell us how she and that team are going to bring back more retrofitting. But it isn't just about how well or how good that will make us. It will be reducing fuel bills for many of our tenants by up to 90%. Those tenants who are suffering fuel poverty. I've had people talk to me in the social clubs where I used to frequent and telling me about some of the conditions of their council homes. And yet this council is one of the best for the maintaining, but they are still cold and they can still get damp maybe in the winter. We are going to try to resolve that. So that's a priority. I want to do that first. Then I want to electrify the railway lines. And then I've got a number of things, but I can't do that. I know we can influence that. That is a top priority of mine, to get carbon reduction in this city, and not just council homes, Councillor Moore and everybody else. We can move. I want us to see to commercialise that, for the council to be in the forefront of production and delivering. I want to see that's possible, and that will be coming up in a minute. I'll speak to it in a minute, that we could be having green growth, green jobs in this city. I think that's a major thing, and I would hope everybody would want to get behind that. So that's me and Karine gone off on one, and Councillor Sutton, I think you can tell the passion of us all on all of this. So I do know that Councillor Williams now wishes to speak. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Chief Exec, Karim Hassan, for making such a powerful presentation and making sure that we are going into this with our eyes fully open. I'd also think we should thank Liz O'Driscoll and the team at Exeter City Futures for producing such an accessible roadmap in terms of the audience. It's there, it's readily readable by public, by all stakeholders, and that's really, really important in terms of us being able to communicate what we're doing and where we want to go. Councillor Sutton mentioned that she linked the recovery plan, quite rightly, to this. And it was mentioned when we were discussing that item, the importance about communities. Well, again, I'd like to thank Exeter City Futures and Karim Hassan in particular for going ahead with an online emergency transport travel roundtable, a green restart on the 20th of May, where 100 people participated in a Zoom. There was a question and answer involving Karim and the leader, and also Councillor Ledbetter and others. And also we then had discussion, and the discussion groups had people right across the communities, different stakeholders, people who joined in because they'd heard about it, in a local WhatsApp group. And that was absolutely fantastic because everybody had a chance to have their say. And I think that illustrates how committed we are to making sure that communities are involved in all of this, because we have to take them with us if we're going to succeed in this really, really ambitious plan. And I think despite COVID-19, we have made a fantastic start. We didn't need any meeting rooms or anything. We just got ahead and did it. And I think I'm feeling very, very confident, and I shall certainly be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Gussain.
Again, first of all, I'm sort of repeating what Councillor Williams has said. I exactly have the same sentiment, but I would like to add that COVID-19 had made me personally, and I hope all of us, see two main things. First of all, that we cannot afford not to go ahead with these plans, because COVID-19 was a result of humans' abuse to environment and biodiversity. And that is one of the reasons why we did have COVID-19. And if people continue to live the way we lived before, just exploiting the environment without any thought for anything, we were going to have many more COVID-19s in different guises. So I'm completely behind the plan, and I completely support it. And we will do our best. Well, hopefully, we will do our best to get there. But try we must. And to me, there is no retreat, basically. Thank you. I will be supporting the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Gussain. I haven't got any indications that anybody would like to speak again. Rachel or Kareem, would you like to come back in on anything? Councillor Sutton?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to my earlier remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Kareem? No. Okay. Thank you. And again, it demonstrates, I believe, the passion from all of us, not everybody in this council, all 39 councillors want to see us achieve this target if we can. We're all signed up to it, and we know we've got to do it. And it does actually demonstrate the amount of work that people may not think everybody's at home doing nothing, but it just demonstrates the amount of work that continues to be going on by the City Council. We really are making ourselves ready, willing and able to get on with the task in front of us. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to put the recommendations to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Fole?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Gussain?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Morse?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
4.
Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton? Sorry, I should have done your second, sorry.
4.
That is a unanimous vote, Chair, in favour of the recommendations, and they have been carried.
Thank you. And just to add for Councillor Moore and her statement, she did ask a couple of questions, and again, she will get a full written answer from me on those particular points. We now move on to item 10, which is Priority Asset Investment Programme. And I think you will see on page 185, we have two recommendations here, which we recognise recognises the priorities in the programme, the importance of good asset management, and recommends to Council that when the budgets identified for each project are set aside when funds are available. And it also delegates authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with the 151 officer or his deputy, the leader of council or deputy, to give final approval to proceed once the council's financial position is secure. And just to remind us, that actually reflects what's within the delegated powers. So we're just confirming all of that. So I'm going to ask in the first instance, David Bartram. David, would you like to speak to the detail of the recommendations? And also we have Mike Carson here. If Mike wants to, I'll come on to you afterwards, Mike, if you would like to come in after David. David Bartram.
Thank you, Chair. So this is maybe a little bit more simple, but still extremely challenging. So as you know, we've been completing an extensive condition survey across our assets. And these are some of the most urgent that have come out of that. So the whole idea behind the condition survey is to put forward a long-term proposal for investment in our assets. But some things we find can't wait for that, and we need to deal with them straight away. They would have all previously probably come as separate reports, so we've decided to put them together to give some ability to compare across them and see, you know, some of the things that we face. And we've also added some other projects to give a flavour of our asset investment priorities, because it's not all just about repairs. There's some in there about preventing loss of income, preventing damage, and that kind of thing. So it's a snapshot, really. So the report gives an overview of each project so that's the covering report, and then the detail is in the appendices. And we realise that our financial position is uncertain, so we're not asking for the funds to be allocated now, but just for recognition of the importance of this programme, and then to delegate the decision as discussed earlier. So the projects we're looking at here are the anti-intrusion measures in some of our highest risk parks. The Riverside Sports Hall, investment in the new roof there. Again, the Corn Exchange, roof replacement there. The Exmouth Boys Store, so this is slightly different, again involving a roof, a common theme with our asset inspections. Prince's Garden Gatehouse, and then a paper about investment in CCTV. So it's all there. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Mike Carson, who deals with the property with David, is there anything you would like to ask or
I'd just say
the discussion?
I'd just say these are early interventions in the fabric of our operational assets on the main. In some cases, such as the Corn Exchange, these are investments that will be necessary to ensure our ability to continue to operate those facilities. In some cases, they're a response to a very particular health and safety issue, like at Prince's Gardens Gatehouse. And in some cases, such as Exmouth Boys Store, there are investments that will enable us to enhance our facilities and operations, in that case, the river and canals operations. So there's a range of reasons for these, but there are some underlying themes, which is a need to address a dearth of investment, and these are the early interventions, and obviously further proposals will emerge over time. That's what I would say.
Yes, thank you, Mike. There's certainly something about roof construction in the 1970s and 1980s which needs to be reviewed. We have a statement to be made under Standing Order 44 by Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Diana Moore.
Thank you. I have 4 comments to make. I'd like to know about the replacement of the roofs, and do they include the installation of solar or thermal panels on them? And I'd like to know more about the provision of short-term transit sites for gypsies and travellers. And I would like to know if there's been consideration of alternative sites, because this has been identified as one of the causes of the problems, setting up a camp on open public space. That was identified in the Equalities Impact Statement, part of the report. I'd like to know if the CCTV replacement includes facial recognition software, and if so, what assessment of the civil liberties issues are associated with this and has been undertaken. And an issue from my ward of St David's, I would like to know, have an update on the funding gap for Mallison Bridge, and why that project is not on this list. Thank you.
Thank you. You've raised a couple of points. Again, I'm going to write to you with your questions, and you've very tenuously had a very thin thread to ask questions about items which are not on this agenda, and this is not a general question time. I will get you those questions, but thank you for your statement anyway. I'm just looking at item 5 rather of the report, page 186, and this may cause some people may look at that and look at the total projects amounting to 2.7 million. Sorry, and I thought we might have had a question about that from somewhere. And I really want Dave Hodgson to explain to us the funding, and in particular of the Riverside Sports Hall, where we have committed to not necessarily wait, but to continue to bring about the Riverside Sports Hall. So David, just explain to us how that capital cost would be, which would have a cost of £70,375, how that would be paid for and funded, please. David.
Thank you, Chair. So in overall terms, the cost of the 6 projects, 2.7 million, as you said, annual cost around £117,500, that's because we will borrow. These are all fairly long-term assets, and we can borrow over a longer period and pay that back. Interest rates are extremely low. In respect of the Riverside Sports Hall roof, this is a continuation of the existing capital project at Riverside to completely refurbish the roof and the rest of the leisure centre. As members will recall, originally the proposal was to fund the Riverside Sports Hall and the rest of the capital project through the sale of the Clifton Hill site. The Clifton Hill site fell short. However, the proposal, the project agreed with Exeter City Living, was undertaken with a loan given by the council to Exeter City Living, and the income generated by the council funded the gap in the original project and will also fund the additional £2 million that is identified here.
Good, thank you, David. I really did want to draw that point out. So that is not an additional pressure on our medium-term plan. It is actually funded from that borrowing margin that we get by lending the money to ECL. I wanted to draw that out now at this time. Okay, I'm going to open it up now. So Councillor Mitchell, you've raised your hand. You would like to come in. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you for asking your question of Dave Hodgson, because I was going to ask a similar point. So you were very right to preempt that, but we've been given that answer. I mean, individually, all of these projects have their own merits, and I'm sure that no one can deny that. However, as has already just been stated, there is with all of them put together, a financial implication on revenue budgets in future years. My question really, and my point would be, I believe that a budget will need to come forward in the near future for this council. And wouldn't it have made more sense for the budget to be presented so that we knew the long-term financial situation, particularly following the comments of the Chief Exec earlier about the £10 million deficit that we now potentially do face, so that we as councillors could weigh up the pros and cons of each of these projects before allocating a sum of money adjacent to them for a future date. I would have just thought it would have made more sense if we were able to look at the whole situation and the priorities of the city as a whole, rather than earmarking these in isolation, if you wish to put it that way. But apart from that, obviously, as I was stating, there are merits for each of these, but I would just like to look at the whole situation in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Your advice is appreciated and your comments noted, but we have every intentions to move these things along as and when, and we will be, you've seen the note about an emergency budget, and I shall be talking to everybody and bringing that back to council. So please be assured we will be taking the right actions. Now, Councillor Ledbetter hasn't indicated that he wants to speak, but Councillor Dave Hodgson, did you, oh, hello, Andrew.
No, got nothing to add.
Good. We know you're there, Andrew, by the way. We know you're there. Thank you, Andrew. David Hodgson, did you want to come in? Can I go back to sleep now? On the county, yes. Dave Hodgson, did you want to come back in at the moment, David?
Hi,
or
thank
do you
you.
want to come in at the end?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think it's important to clarify for all councillors the purpose of the emergency budget and why that's a little bit separate to this. So the emergency budget is about a need in year to reduce expenditure in order to ensure that the budget is balanced. But it's a 1 year only issue. This is looking at this year's budget and a potential gap and temporarily stopping expenditure. This report is focusing on a long-term issue and addressing deficiencies in our assets over a longer period. So the actual budget, the emergency budget, won't be looking at that. It will be looking at the temporary stopping, not long-term savings. And I think it's important to have that distinction. The other key issue is that the report will come in July at the same council that this report is actually considered as well.
Okay, thank you, David. I've got Councillor Wright who would like to come in. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in the light of what Dave has just explained, I would definitely support all of these things. As you've mentioned, roofs, there's a common theme of roofs all the way through, and we all know what happens if you don't actually fix your roof before a storm's coming. We don't want to be in that position again. We have to look after our assets as best as we can, and particularly, well, all of them are important, but for me, the Riverside Sports Centre is something I dare not mention it, but I have to. We need that done. We need that fixed. And I've read the report. The 2 million is to get the roof done to future-proof it. So we could go ahead with getting the pool opened without addressing the roof problem at the moment, the way I understand it. But then that's likely to come back and bite us in the near future. So while you've got, to be very basic, while you've got the scaffolding up there, get the lot done. And David's already explained very well how that money is going to come forward from the Clifton Hill site. It's really important to us when we do start recovering from COVID. I think leisure is going to be a big thing for everybody, and the people in St Thomas Ward have been waiting for a very long time to be able to get back to using the Riverside. And also in the ward is the Pincers Garden Gatehouse. It's not a leisure centre, it's an ornamental, historically interesting gatehouse, but at the moment the roof is dangerous and it's all had to be fenced off, so nobody can enter the park without having to walk a good quarter of a mile around, and it's dangerous, so it needs doing. So I support this.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think I want to just reiterate Dave's point around the long-term nature of this investment, particularly in relation, as it's a very big point of this report, to the Riverside roof, where we've had the situation where the pool at the Riverside, as everyone in Exeter knows, has been closed for far too long. And that's a reflection of the capital investment that this council unfortunately couldn't take over the last 10 years in some of its assets. We've got to be so mindful of keeping our investment up in these assets, because if we don't, we're going to end up in situations where it's not just a one-year effect, like we're talking about in terms of the budget we may have to pass in July, but it can be a multi-year effect on people's lives and people's lives in Exeter. There are kids who will have grown up in Exeter who will have not had the benefit of some of the facilities because of a lack of capital investment in the past, and we don't want to allow that to happen in the future. So in respect of these assets, it's vital that we put in place the long-term measures to make sure that, regardless of short-term issues and regardless of what's happening right now, that for the future we have the right things for the people of Exeter.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. And indeed, you're right. The clue is in the title of prioritising our asset investment programme. I don't see that we've got anybody else to speak. David or Mike, is there anything you would like to come back on?
I don't think so, Chair. Thank you.
All right, good.
Nope, nothing from me.
Okay, thank you very much. And obviously it will all be part and parcel of the bigger picture when we come to rely on these things. As I've said before, you know, we will take the decisions, and unlike some, I will follow the science on all of this. And that's what we intend to do, stick to the science. So, Mark, can you call the roll call for the voting on the recommendations, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Fole.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Gassane.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
4.
Thank you very much. Yes, that is a unanimous vote, Chair, in favour of the recommendations, and they have been carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for completing that. We now go on to item 11, which is the Exeter City Group request for funding for new company business cases and additional financial support. And here we have 2 recommendations. Recommendation 1 allocates 300,000 for the development of 3 business cases to explore the feasibility of creating new subsidiaries. And £60,000 for a new finance manager, commercial to support Exeter City Group and the wider council companies. Ultimately, this will be funded by the companies themselves. And also the delegated authority to the Chief Exec in consultation with the 151 officer or deputy, the leader of the council and or deputy, to give final approval to proceed once the council's financial position is secure. So I'm going to ask Dave Hodgson to talk to this, and obviously to tell us where the 300,000 and the 60,000 is going to come from and why we need to do it. David.
Thank you, Chair. So members will be acutely aware of our current financial position caused by the restrictions choking off our income streams, which means that we have an immediate need to balance the in-year budget. However, members should also be mindful that the council is looking at a medium-term shortfall in its funding of around £4 million. And one of the critical ways of reducing that funding gap that members would like to explore is enhancing the work of the Exeter City Group to generate a long-term income for the council. In order to do that, we need to undertake a number of business cases to demonstrate that this is viable and will provide what the council wants. From a finance point of view, I couldn't recommend going ahead with the creation of additional companies without detailed, extensive work having been undertaken to demonstrate the viability of those companies and that they won't provide a significant risk to the council's future position. Therefore, if we want to go down this path, it's absolutely essential that we provide the funding to undertake the business plans to enable us to deliver that. The second part of the report is requesting £60,000 for a commercial finance manager to support the new companies, Exeter City Living on its own as it currently is, and also Strata. We have a lot of companies. Every single company has a significant amount of work from a finance point of view to be undertaken, and my team's not big enough to undertake the work of that. If you think that the statutory accounts process is almost duplicated from a council through each of the other companies, so each company is a significant amount of work. The funding for that will come from the companies themselves, not from the council. So the council will employ the member of staff, but they'll be seconded to work. That will support Exeter City Group in that they will be able to work directly with them, sit in their offices and focus on them and give them the amount of support that they need to make those companies a success. I don't really have anything further to say. The £300,000 will be set aside from general fund balances and will be part of the challenge for this year, but it's absolutely essential that members consider this as a potential solution to our longer term funding gap. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. And of course, this is a chicken and egg situation. I've been asked, what is our priority? What is my priority? I say we want to retrofit, and so therefore we want to reduce carbon. That is that the egg or is that the chicken? But what comes first? We've got to get a company set up that can work with the HRA, work with us commercially to get this done. So it's almost like the 6 that we need to pass go. So on this point, I've got a contribution under Standing Order 44, a statement to be made by Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Leader. It's probably a very simple yes/no answer here. Will the outcome of the business development, a report of the viability and risks, be presented to the council as part of the due diligence of examining the business case? And will that include, if they're viable, details of the governance arrangements and appointments?
Okay, thank you for your statement. I don't see any indication from Councillor Mitchell or Councillor Ledbetter to come in on this point. No. Again, in your statement, Councillor Moore, you've asked 2 questions. They are short answers, and that will be a short email to you about it. But I can give it away that all these things will come back to the executive and will come back to the full council for all decisions. We've got a proper structure in how we make our decisions, and I am not going to bypass the executive or the council at all. So perhaps that, but I will still email you back with the answers to this issue. I'm going to open this up for any comments, and I've got Councillor Wright would like to come in. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I've been quite pleased recently to be part of a consultation along with the leader, Councillor Fole, and relevant officers to investigate setting up a robust governance and leadership structure for the Exeter City Group. under which these new companies, if found to be viable, will operate alongside Exeter City Living. We know that there's going to be a report coming forward about that, and that is going to be done so that we can then look at the viability of the companies, which is what this report is about, but also be able to have a good governance structure in place to make sure that these companies will be able to do what we want them to do and they go in the direction that we want them to do, which we've been talking about so far with the zero carbon neutral plan for Exeter. This all feeds into that really well. So the council themselves have already been underway with a feasibility study for retrofitting its own council housing stock. And today the leader and I had an update on this progress, which was incredibly impressive. And as a council, we're very well underway to facilitating high quality housing, which could alleviate fuel poverty for our residents and our own tenants. A retrofit company, which could further progress this work being undertaken by the HRA, could then offer high quality retrofit solution to all residential properties in the city, which can only be a good thing. It can offer all of Exeter residents a chance to be part of bringing down carbon emissions, so to be part of that vision for Exeter, and also to help with bringing down their own fuel costs, not necessarily fuel poverty, but fuel challenge perhaps. So what's going on already, what has already started with the offices in the council housing HRA part of this, it's not just ambitious, but it's also feasible and it's financially viable. So being able to have these companies in place to be able to continue with that is a good thing. I have to stop there because my dog is trying to join in every time I talk.
Well, Councillor Wright, I'm not sure there's a standing order to allow your dog to, like many others, bark at me, but I feel sure we may look at that. Laura, I'll let Laura go, and if she wants to come back in once she has settled the dog. John Street wants to say something. John.
No, it wasn't, Leader. I'm afraid I was just commenting upon your standing order for dogs to be involved in the discussions. Sorry.
Well, we're trying to be an inclusive council, John. But anyway, Councillor, no, she is not. So I'm going to open this up. Is there anybody else wish to come in on this? I will ask Councillor Wright if she wants to come back in a moment, but shall I tell you something which I hope, and I know the executive aren't missing it, but we also intend to breathe life into the residential property company. This is a property company which we will want to form, whereby we can take housing in for market rent. Isn't that a great thing? Isn't that a great thing that we will be doing that to disrupt the market here in Exeter, to be able to provide private rented accommodation, not just social or affordable, and that's not paid for by the HRA, that we can be able to do deals in with that. Because there is a big gap in Exeter of people who want decent private rented houses. They're quite happy to rent with decent leases, decent landlords, and I believe that this residential property company could be one of them. Now, isn't that a great idea? Together along with the consultancy, already that we have got major authorities wanting to talk to us about how we are doing, not just in the HRA, but also with what we've done with Exeter City Living in our passive house. And remember, we are going to have the first passive house leisure centre open during the course of next year. Let's celebrate, Let's celebrate some of these things that we're trying to do in Exeter. And we need to position ourselves. We need to position us that when we bring that budget forward, that we can have all these streams in place, work with our partners, work with that place board. Can you just see? I mean, this enthuses me greatly, as it's most probably showing, and I know I need some carbs, somebody will most probably tell me, but I think it's such an important thing, what we're trying to do. Let's look at the big picture. I really can only commend this work to you, and we will get a report back. It will deal with all those strategies. In actual fact, the Exeter City Group will be effectively a holding company, which will have subsidiary companies like ECL, the residential property company, a retrofit company, and also a consultancy company, which will allow us to deliver all these aspirations we've got. I'm truly quite excited by it, and I can't wait to see this report coming back in a positive way. But of course, that will come to council, and we will all have a chance to debate it. So, have you settled the dog, Councillor Wright? Do you want to come back in on anything?
I have settled the dog, Chair, but I don't think I've got anything further to add.
Okay, right.
That's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. So there's no further contributions. David Hodgson, did you want to come back on anything, on any of that, David?
No, I've got nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, Mark, can you call the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Fole?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Gussain?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Morse?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you very much. That is a unanimous vote, Chair, in favour. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. We now move on to item 12, which is the City Point update on the Parish Street and Sybil Street regeneration. I call this the remaining bus station site, and the bit that goes around it, just to help clarify the situation. And so we've got some recommendations here, 1, 2, and 3, that the progress to date on bringing forward the City Point is noted, that the provisional agreed memorandum of agreement with the principal landowners be progressed to facilitate the next steps towards the comprehensive redevelopment, and that the city surveyor be authorised to explore, in conjunction with our partners, potential routes to early appointment of a development partner or partners for the delivery of the scheme, which can deliver our collective vision and objectives for the scheme in a timely manner. Mike Carson, would you like to speak to the paper, please?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. I think it's particularly critical at this time that we seek to keep and maintain the momentum that is established in delivering a sustainable development on the City Point site. It's particularly important at a time when the economy, both nationally and locally, is going to be facing significant headwinds, and we must seek to take all steps that we can to try and keep this project moving forward. My report does discuss the issues that are facing the property sector in the current situation, both in relation to the immediacy of COVID-19 and the potential, well, almost certain recessionary impacts of the virus. The consequences of that is that many in the property market in all sectors of the property market are tending to err on the side of caution. And we ourselves will need to take steps to ensure that we are still delivering an appropriate project, reflecting the new realities as we come out of the other side of this pandemic. But it is important to rebuild and reinforce the city centre's strengths and to progress the new direction that we've identified for the city centre and the city as a whole. We may, of course, need to revisit our own ambitions as regard workplace strategy in terms of what we might be looking to deliver it by way of a civic hub, and we may need to revisit some of the assumptions that were being made with regard to the quantum of office development, but those actions are in hand at the moment. But notwithstanding those reservations, it is important that we, if we wish to continue to advance and deliver a sustainable scheme on this site, that we look forward to do so without delay. And as part of that process, we are beginning to explore the possibilities of accelerating those process by securing a partner or partners that will be capable of demonstrating a patient capital approach to the site, enabling being able to demonstrate a shared purpose and long-term vision for the overall site. And we are tentatively engaging with other parties to actually to see what we can do to bring things forward sooner rather than later. The memorandum of agreement is provisionally agreed with the Crown Estates and Nuveen, who are the other significant property holders on the City Point site. And the intention is now to progress that to completion and then progress, having put that in place, with a joint selection of partners. We will, of course, continue to review viability throughout this process so that we're not exposed to excessive risk as any part of this exercise. And we will, with your support tonight, look to explore the early delivery options where those are compatible with the principles of best consideration, avoidance of state aid, and of course our beloved procurement regulations. I therefore recommend the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I've not had any indication from anybody at the moment who wants to speak on this. Okay. So enough. We all, the paper is quite important. It explains it very well, easy to read. I understand it. So I would hope that's understood by all. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to take the vote on the recommendations, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Fole.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
4.
Thank you. That is a unanimous vote, Chair, in favour. Those recommendations have been carried.
Thank you, Mark. And that does conclude the agenda. And I'd like to thank everybody. It's been a long meeting, and I think we all subscribe to the fact that these Zoom meetings can be very tiring, especially on a lovely evening like we've got today. 2 hours well spent, if I can say to everybody, as we begin to leave, because there were some big decisions that we've made. And the message from me to everybody is that Exeter City Council and the group that I represent are determined to place ourselves in a position to make sure that we're in the forefront of the recovery in Exeter, working with everybody. So again, thank you, everybody. A lot more to happen, and I feel sure our agenda in July will be equally as important and also interesting. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you, everybody.